stage is set for the 2022 edition of the Nigeria Fintech Week, starting tomorrow, Tuesday, and will be hosted by the Nigerian Fintech Association, the umbrella body for banks, non-banks, and other industry professionals and companies within the country's financial technology ecosystem. Ade Bajomo, who is a banker and fintech professional, is the current president of the Nigerian Fintech Association, and he joins us now for a robust conversation on the industry, as well as an outlook on what to expect from this week's program. Good evening to you, sir. We appreciate you coming on the show. Can you tell us about the Nigeria Fintech Week program and a bit of the association's progress report?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me on the show. This is the 6th edition of the Nigeria National Fintech Week. We're extremely excited to be hosting it at Fintech NGR. And, it's got a lineup of some really, really interesting speakers and fintechs, some of the best we can showcase, not just in Nigeria, but across the world. We've got well over 80 speakers, formidable speakers, industry titans with real life experiences. So this is not a talking shop. It is about bringing about real life experiences and raising the bar. And hopefully people who attend will actually feel an uplift in their knowledge of the ecosystem and have things to take away. This year's theme was actually carefully thought out. It's called Navigating the Next Norm: Sustainable Impacts in Fintech, E-Government, and Emerging Technologies. So, and when you look at, the thought process behind that, prior to 2020, we had digital transformation. And then we had COVID, and then people were talking about the new norm, so to speak, really. This is the next norm where we have to live in the COVID world, but be mindful of ESG issues, environmental, social, and governance issues, which are extremely key if we're going to sustain that nascent industry to become one of the best in Africa and, of course, in the world. As an association, we have over 300 members. We started with just about 7 years ago. And we have 3 core objectives. It's about connecting the fintech ecosystem, accelerating the development of fintechs in Nigeria, building that broader global ecosystem, and indeed advocating for fintechs. As you can imagine, there's a lot to advocate for. When you're pushing technology at a cutting edge, regulation will always catch up with it. So that advocacy is a very critical part of our role.
All right. Thanks for that. Well, what are the top issues in Nigeria's fintech space so far this year in 2022, which is now coming to a close?
The top issues, ironically, haven't changed that much if you go back anytime. The regulators and interfacing with regulators is always top. Top for investors wanting to know what does the regulation say about where we're operating. Top for fintech founders and fintech operators who want a right size regulation to allow them to operate in the industry. So when you look at capital requirements required for banks and you make the same capital requirements for fintechs, you can all of a sudden see how that could just stifle fintech. That's not to say that regulation is not important. In fact, regulation is absolutely critical if we're to build a formidable fintech industry, but it's actually working in balance, with the regulators. And I can speak a little bit more on that. We set up what is called the Regulators Forum, where we have the regulators come in with the fintechs on a quarterly basis. And that's one to applaud as well, both in the industry and indeed with the World Economic Forum as well. We've been observers in that. We all know about the skills gap, the talent gap. It's always been there. It's accelerated, everybody's Japan as they call it. Yeah, but for me, really, that skills gap is not just about the top level. The fintech industry is relatively young. And if we're being very honest about it, the depth of talent has always been a problem. How many engineers does Nigeria have that have over 15 years of experience in cutting code or in deep analytics, AI, machine learning, and those kind of really groundbreaking stuff. So we really need to cultivate and develop that talent, that skills gap. Access to funding is an issue as well. We've got some initiatives around that as Fintech NGR. We set up the startup marketplace. Really excited about the startup bill. because that again creates some opportunities to address those problems as well. And indeed, skills in terms of both technical and non-technical skills. I spoke about the technical skills, but we're talking about fintechs, and we use the term fintechs, by the way, not just for financial technology participants. We use it in a generic form to cover all forms of technology within this context specifically. But when you take fintech specifically, that is financial technology participants, the depth of skills has to be deepened as well. You're talking about risk management, you're talking about cyber fraud, cyber security, and all of the issues such as that. We've partnered with the Chartered Institute of Bankers to offer a deeper curriculum, which allows our fintech members, 300 out of them, to actually enroll on those courses and actually raise the bar in terms of their skill set.
Great stuff. So you mentioned the startup bill a moment ago, and if I was to ask you how much progress has the industry made this year, well, considering the policy environment, would the startup bill be your first answer, or would you refer to any other hurdles that have been crossed with respect to the policy environment and the interaction with regulators?
Yeah, I would probably have other items. That's certainly a key milestone. We have to see how it's implemented. It's one thing to have the policies, another thing to make sure it's really delivering those initiatives that you hope it delivers in there. But top on the list, has to be that despite, the global economic downturn, despite a squeeze for cash, let's be blunt, about it. Cash was relatively cheap, with quantitative easing and co over the last 3-4 years. So when you look at what's happened, the Russian war against Ukraine in February, inflation rising, interest rates rising, the scramble for cash and the deployment of cash in fintechs becomes very, very tight, and I'm really encouraged to see that despite all of that, Nigeria still manages to attract or still attracting a reasonable amount. And I hope that, not only do we meet what we attracted last year, which is 1.3 billion, I think that was the largest flow in Africa last year, but I will beat it as well. So that to me is certainly one of the progress that we've made. And, outside of that, really, we're beginning to see a number of fintechs coming up in insurtech, ed tech, especially agri-tech, health tech. So all of those collectively helps to start deepening, if you like, the industry and the market as well.
Great stuff. And we chat specifically to still on the regulatory engagement. So that was the environment. Now regulatory engagement and interface with your member institutions. How much would you say has been achieved?
I'm pretty excited about this particular one. I think we've achieved a lot, but there's still a lot more to achieve. Innovation will always be ahead of regulation. Certainly a number of our regulators have really raised the bar, and, they've demonstrated the level of humility, but also agility and engagement to try and drive the industry forward. And, without a doubt, you only need to look at the Securities and Exchanges Commission, in terms of the real actual things they've done in terms of this industry. Way back in 2019, they engaged Fintech NGR, our association, to actually map out the fintech roadmap for the capital market. And you can just see, this is well over 3 years ago. And out of that fintech roadmap, you now have, regulation around crowdfunding. You have regulation around digital assets. These are market leading thought processes that require this to come out as well. So in that respect, a lot has been done. We want to see a lot more. We've seen the Central Bank of Nigeria come up with its own sandbox. We've seen innovation around e-Naira, which is very exciting. I think it's the third jurisdiction in the world, to do that, and, people can have their reservations about e-Naira, but, the nature of money has changed. So whether we like it or not, that's where it's going. And it's great to be right ahead of it and encourage a whole basis of innovation around it. But we'd like to see a lot more. I spoke around the Regulators Forum. The regulators forum, as the name says, regulators and innovators, meet on a quarterly basis. It has SEC, CBN, the NFIU, NITDA, all the key regulators. And we need to really, work in tighter partnership to really drive this industry forward and take it to the next level. So regulation around digital lending, for example. Our association has actually engaged the relevant parties to try and find a level or a balanced regulation around it. If you take digital lending, there's no doubt we have some rogue operators. And our role is not to protect rogue operators, but what you can't do is throw away the baby with the bathwater. Is to recognize that there are proper fintechs, well-funded fintechs who want to operate with the governance and appreciate the regulation, but work the regulation to make sure that they grow and we make Nigeria the home base for fintechs, not just in Africa, but across the world. So a lot of work, a lot of progress, but still a lot more to be done. All in the right direction.
All right. Are there any external headwinds that the local fintech industry are watching very closely, and how do you position against them? I guess even beyond, regulations.
Yeah, there will always be headwinds. Without headwinds, really, businesses don't develop muscle. It's like the training ground of businesses, and it's a nascent industry. And there are quite a number, to be quite frank about it. One of the least talked one about is cyber risk, cyber security, data privacy, and all of those kind of issues. These are very, very top of the agenda items for fintech advisory boards, fintech operators. They've got to come to the top of the table, and we have to build resilient systems that can actually withstand a lot of these issues, because as you scale up your operation, then obviously those risk issues and those governance issues, and we saw a couple of governance mishaps. Thankfully they were all managed very tightly by the relevant companies, and things seems to be right on track. Competition is going to be tough. For fintechs, fintechs are the relatively easy ride. When money was easy, free, cheap, money is a bit tougher. So the quest to get the right amount of funding is going to be tough. But the incumbents are also waking up. So if you look at banks, banks may have been slow to the game, but many banks realize that if they're going to survive today, they have to operate at least part of the operations as fintechs do. So banks have now followed, or many banks, not all, have followed a number of those principles in terms of agility, in terms of separate teams, and driving and focusing on business customer issues and using all of those good things and good practices in decision making that fintechs have brought to the play. So the competition is going to be stiffer, is a point I'm making for those reasons, really. Regulation will remain a tough one. The regulators have their job to do. They have to protect the consumers in everything they do. And it's that balance between innovation, and regulation that we have to strike. And of course, investment, which I spoke much earlier about.
Great stuff. We really appreciate the insightful conversation and wish you all the best at your annual summit. Ade Bajomo, President of the Nigerian Fintech Association, thank you so much.